From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is Washington Times columnist Matt Mackowiak. And on that note, we should go to our first issue, which is issue 1, Trump's turnaround.
We're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated.
In a series of executive and congressional actions this week, the president joined with Republicans to prevent more illegal immigrant children from being separated from their parents. President Trump had previously said that the separations were a necessary component of immigration law, but changed course after coming under extensive pressure from Democrats, some Republicans, and even his wife, the First Lady, Melania. Democrats, however, say the changes do not go far enough.
Pat, do the changes go far enough?
Political reality means that they cannot impose a policy that separates the parents from children. Legal reality says you can't put the kids into incarceration along with the parents. This forces you right back to catch and release, the total failed policy there. And this forces this issue for the next couple of weeks right onto the front pages. But in the fall, Tom, this is going to be the great issue. You got sanctuary cities here. Right. You got immigration on that. You got the angel moms whose kids have been murdered. All of these problems, immigration is going to be the issue of the fall campaign, as it already is in Europe, and is going to be, I think, the issue of our time.
Eleanor.
Well, Trump is going to ride the immigration issue into the midterms, thinking he can create the red wave. Sounds more like the Red Scare to me. This was a week of epic lying and theatrical cruelty. The notion that you have to detain children with their parents, you don't have to do that. It's a tool that's available. The Obama administration ended it because it was unnecessary cruelty, didn't solve anything. After the 20-day limit, I doubt the courts are going to ease up the regulations. Then what does he do? And then you pile incompetence on top of cruelty. They have no idea where they have shipped kids all over this country, 2,500 of them. How do they even reunite them? It is a colossal mess, and the analogy that's made is to Bush and Katrina, but the Bush people, they righted the ship. They understood how government worked. Yep. These people, they don't want to govern, and they don't know how to govern. They have no idea how to fix this.
And yet, Matt, it does seem that Republicans sense there is an opportunity to mobilize this in terms of the midterms.
Yeah, and that's the delicate balance here, right? I mean, on the one hand, from a political standpoint, there's an opportunity to mobilize the base and to remind them of the stakes of the midterm elections, and for Trump to deliver on promises he made as it relates to immigration. He certainly promised to end catch and release by putting the zero tolerance policy in place. They've done that. But clearly, this was a losing position. They were in a tenuous, untenable position this week. You don't see President Trump backtrack very often. Right. He even approached an apology this week. Right. Maybe didn't get all the way there.
Within shouting distance of it.
Within shouting distance of it. But yeah, this was untenable. But the question now is, this story is probably not over because they haven't reunified the children with the adults. And so if you still have 1,800 or so children, the ability to reunify them and to do that in a thoughtful way, we'll have to see how that goes.
Clarence.
Just reunifying them, period. I mean, it's astounding to me. This is the cornerstone of Donald Trump's presidential campaign all the way through it. All this time, he didn't think about what do we do with these families now when we do start rounding people up.
No plan at all.
No plans at all. And this is where he had to come close to apologizing. I think the closest before was probably the Hollywood Access tape. But in this instance, this is a key issue of his campaign, and thus you have to wonder what kind of the future do we have?
Yeah, and he's pushing this American carnage message. You know, they're murdering, the aliens are murdering us. The crime rate is way down. The crime rate among immigrants and illegal immigrants is lower than natural-born citizens. And when you've got 3.9% unemployment, he's still arguing they're coming here to take your jobs. We need these immigrants. There are help-wanted signs all over those border
I think
towns.
if you ask the American people, should we secure the American border and stop the invasion of the United States by illegal aliens who are coming endlessly, the American people will say, do it. The American people will say yes to zero tolerance. They'll say no to dividing
As in
folks.
Italy?
Yep. Look, Italy, you got Italy, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria, you got Poland, you got Hungary, all of them. There's a firestorm in Europe against immigration across the Mediterranean, and it may in the next 2 weeks bring down the government of Angela Merkel. Trump has got a problem short term. He's got a problem short term. Long term, this country's got a problem. And long term,
it's much worse.
Concluding point.
I mean, in Europe, they do have a much more serious problem than us because of trying to accommodate all of the new people they're bringing. Yep. And we don't really have a problem. This is part of America's tradition for us to be debating this every so often, and we're still.
Germany took in, I think, 900,000 Syrians.
It almost finished Merkel.
Yeah. Issue 2, Putin.
CNN this week reported that President Trump is likely to meet with President Vladimir Putin of Russia next month. Sources who have spoken to your moderator also say the meeting is highly likely, and a Russian government spokesman says that National Security Advisor John Bolton will travel to Moscow in the coming days for preparatory talks. But with NATO increasingly alarmed by Russian threats and its members blaming Russia for a recent chemical weapons attack on British soil, many Democrats say this is no time for Trump to grant Putin diplomatic rewards. Putin has long sought a meeting with Trump as a way to rebuild his legitimacy following Russia's 2014 seizure of Crimea, Ukraine.
Eleanor, if Democrats can support the president meeting with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, why not President Putin of Russia?
I think the situation is a little different. It's wrong politically, it's wrong morally, it's wrong every which way to meet with Putin at this particular juncture. There is an investigation going on into the president's ties with Russia and Putin's influence. Plus, what Putin is trying to do is to divide NATO and divide the European Union. And for Trump to blatantly meet separately with him after he has dissed the other members and dissed our historic allies, it really is doing Putin's dirty work.
Look, Merkel went to see him in Sochi. I mean, why can't the President of the United States go to talk to the Russians, who are our main strategic adversary, at least in Eurasia? And you know, they got conflicts in Syria. We want to make sure our troops don't engage with their troops and planes in there. You've got the Iran issue. You got the Iran, whether the Russians are going to lift sanctions, et cetera. You got the sanctions on Putin. You got the Baltic. You've got all these occasions where our planes and ships are almost hitting each other. There's a tremendous amount of things that can be done to ease tensions.
And you actually think any of that would come up?
Well, let me ask you. It is peace.
No way.
Peace is moral, Eleanor.
Peace is moral, but playing footsie with somebody who has undermined our electoral process and who is seeking to undermine our allies is not the way to go.
Look, 3 years after Khrushchev sent tanks into Budapest and mowed down 50,000 people, he was going through Washington, and I was outside the White House, you know, staring at him because Ike brought him in, because that's what you got to do when you're in this world.
But would you admit Putin to NATO now? Would you admit Putin to NATO now? Do you think that is
not letting him NATO? No, but bringing him back to the G7 and making it a G8. Why not?
But because we got a lot of unresolved business with Putin.
That's how you resolve it, by talking to him. You resolve it by talking.
Well, we're going to resolve all this by talking. I mean, like Eleanor said, how much did Trump accomplish talking to the president of North Korea?
Right,
I don't know. Do you think it was wrong to try to deal with the North Korean crisis after 65 years?
Well, of course not, Pat. Nobody. I mean, everybody says talk is better than war, but if you're not going to deal with the details, and Trump is just not a detail man, then what good does it do?
Matt.
Yeah, the risk here is the message this sends about the United States' commitment to NATO.
Right.
Particularly since Trump's trip, when he's apparently going to potentially meet bilaterally with Putin, is on the heels of the NATO meeting in Brussels. I think the sequencing here matters. I think what our NATO allies would like to see is to see him meet with Putin not before NATO, but after.
Right.
And that would be the right way to do it.
Would you support it if that was the case?
I would support it in that case, because then he can carry the message from NATO to Putin and they can reconcile some of these issues. So I'm kind of in the middle here between Pat and Eleanor. I don't believe you shouldn't talk to
our NATO allies pony up a little more for their own defense 75 years after World War II.
Okay, so maybe let him back into the G7, but with a big ticket of admission. We'll see how that goes.
Let's do a little round robin here. If President Putin, if they have a summit, who gains from it? Russia or the United States? Matt?
Putin probably gains from it.
I think Putin gets an advantage from that, but Trump gets an advantage from being willing to speak to people other people won't.
Not Putin gets the advantage, and if he does it adjacent to the NATO meeting, it's a real poke in the eye of our traditional allies and a real boost to someone whose intentions are not honorable.
Right, Putin is well positioned to gain from this, whereas it's still not clear about the relationship between Trump and Putin. Why is Trump so impressed with Putin as well as other despots and all? There's a big cloud over that relationship.
Okay. Beware the Lubyanka. Issue 3, cyber taxes.
The Supreme Court this week overturned a law that had prevented state governments from taxing cyber retail companies such as Amazon unless those cyber retailers had a physical presence in their respective state. Writing for the 5-4 majority, Justice Anthony Kennedy ruled that the former situation meant retail operations were, quote, further removed from economic reality and results in significant revenue losses to the states, end quote. Critics of the ruling, however, say this decision should have been left to Congress.
Matt, is this bad news for consumers and good news for brick and mortars?
It's complicated, and it's complicated because this ruling, this 5-4 ruling, strikes down a previous ruling related to mail order stores. What it functionally does is it now opens up retailers, particularly third-party sellers, to 10,000 state and local jurisdictions who put sales tax on products. Fundamentally, that's not good for consumers. But it also sent this case back to the lower courts. And so I think there is an opportunity for Congress to step in and say, what is going to be taxed at what levels, what is eligible for that. It's a complicated ruling. Amazon was basically prepared for this. A lot of the other sellers were not prepared for this.
And they can absorb the liability regulations.
You know, but this is going to be a real hit to consumers. You know, some of the largest sales tax states are Louisiana and Tennessee, southern states like that. Of course, New York and California are up there 9th and 10th or so. So I think it's going to be a net transfer of wealth from consumers over to government. And so, I mean, there's no doubt who's the winner in this. Big government.
Unlike most issues which divide along tribal lines, this is, you look at the Supreme Court decision, you had Justice Ginsburg, the lion of the liberals, siding with Clarence Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, and then you had the Chief Justice, John Roberts, writing the dissenting opinion with the court's liberals, Breyer and Kay and Sotomayor. So when I was looking at that, I thought, hey, which side am I on? I like to see Amazon get poked every once in a while, but I
So you're like Trump.
So does Trump,
but I think they benefit from this because I think it enhances their ability to have a monopoly. It drives the smaller retail outlets out of business.
It won't be much of a fiscal change for Amazon because they're already charging sales tax almost all across the country anyway. This is a wave of the future, though. It's been we consumers have been lucky that this has been held off as long as it has, but we know inevitably we're going to tax. Government will tax whatever it can, and the internet is the new marketplace.
And maybe the big beneficiary as well will be Walmart, the competition, the super giants. But to some degree,
they got
Pat,
sales tax too there, I think, don't they, Tom?
I think
is
they
that
do.
Where you shop?
Well, no. Walmart though is investing big time in their digital space to try and compete with Amazon.
Right.
But Pat, you know, you've talked a lot about the sort of collapsing of communities, etc.
Right.
Do you not think, to some degree, this helps those brick and mortars? At least gives them a sort of a level.
Well, to the degree it gives a disadvantage to the people buying over the internet, yeah. But I mean, this has grown so huge that you can't remain outside this whole. This whole regime, if you will, of taxation.
All right.
Watch for Congress to.
Pat, have you shopped online?
I have a missus that does all that good
Okay,
stuff.
I suspected that.
All right. Well, let's have a little. What did people think of the First Lady's jacket?
The jacket was fine. It's the inscription that I'm wondering about.
It's totally mystifying. There were all these theories, and I gather the Free Melania crowd who think that she's somehow being held captive by her husband, that this was a message to him.
And her husband
I don't
says
know. It is so callous and unthinking and just atonal that I can't fathom it. Why, when you're going to visit kids who've been separated from their parents and you want to show compassion, would you wear a jacket like that
Well, maybe
on
it was
your
a
way?
message to someone else.
But our communications director ought to be called into the West Wing, I
You
think.
had that job before, Pat.
Yeah,
All right.
you know it well.
When we come back, Brexit and free speech. While you're waiting, make sure to follow us at McLaughlin Group on Twitter and visit our website, mclaughlin.com. We'll see you in a moment.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Issue 4, Brexit.
On March 29th, 2019, Britain will leave the European Union. But while British Prime Minister Theresa May won tentative parliamentary approval for her Brexit plans this week, many complications remain. European Union Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker this week warned, quote, "As the clock to Brexit clicks down, we must prepare for every eventuality, including no deal," end quote. Juncker's concerns speak to tensions with Britain over the movement of persons and trading arrangements that will follow Brexit. Another issue, the question of how Brexit will affect the border between the British territory of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
Clarence, as things stand, will Brexit be a success or a failure?
Well, to paraphrase our president, who knew that Brexit could be so complicated? I mean, fact is, things are moving along, but about as easily as the wall issue in the U.S. Congress, and there are connections there. We must remember Brexit happened right before Trump's election. Pat is right in that there is an international trend toward this kind of a political fragmentation, but actually implementing it is more complicated than talking about it, and that's kind of the stage where Brexit is right now.
I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse in the UK, and I think Theresa May, who's not a very popular leader, but hey, leadership is about leading. I'd like to see her call for another referendum. I don't know that her party would back her.
What gets me, Eleanor, that you're a great advocate of democracy. And these folks went and voted 52 to 48, clear cut that they wanted to leave, and she's assigned to do the job, and you're now saying, well, give us another vote.
Because a lot of people were misled going into that election, and they thought that money would be saved and it would go into the health system, and they thought all the immigrants would be left out.
People were misled in voting for Trump, but he's the president, isn't he?
If we could have a do-over here, I'd be for that too.
That was a soundbite of the week, Pat. I like that.
Yeah. The important thing here is the Parliament passed the Withdrawal Act this week, now really pushing towards the March deadline of 2019. Obviously, the negotiation continues. The EU's negotiators taking a pretty hardline position and continues to change his demands. What was interesting about the vote in the Parliament is you had a number of Tories that voted against May, but you had more of the other party that voted in the other direction, which is why it narrowly passed. So obviously the big issues still have to be resolved, but I don't think there's going to be another referendum vote. I really don't. No. And May was not in favor of Brexit in the first place, but she believed her duty as a transitional prime minister was to carry out Brexit.
See, Eleanor?
I don't know that Matt's the last word, so.
Who here thinks, though, that we might, Der Spiegel, the German magazine, had a piece talking about authoritarianism and the rising sort of fragmentation there. But actually, if you look at some of the referendums or some of the actions around Europe, the Netherlands, for example, trying to move away from referendums, there could be this argument, to Pat's point, that these liberal-minded governments are trying to restrain the truest version of democracy, populist
vote. Sure. I mean, the EU basically is this gigantic carapace over the top of Europe, and people want to make their own decisions. Yeah. And that's going to maybe cost them some money, but if they got the courage to do it, they ought to do it. But why is there a condemnation, Tom, of all these groups that vote one way in Austria and Poland and Hungary? They're denounced, but they've done this democratically.
This is a trend that has come about because of a lot of economic anxiety around the planet, a lot of diversity anxiety. But Eleanor's right in that once they do make the move to take this kind of a vote, they start saying, what have we done? That's the same kind of thing happened here, like you say, with the Trump's election.
When Washington,
well, social progress, it's always, 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps back. And I think, Europe is straining right now under trying to keep true to their values. And I think in the end,
Tom,
they will
I think
succeed.
a lot of guys probably were concerned that they should not have broken away from Great Britain in 1776.
So I hear.
All right,
Thus the War of 1812.
Well, I am the hybrid. Anyway, issue 5, heir to Charlottesville.
The National Park Service this week approved a request by Jason Kessler's far-right movement to hold a white civil rights rally in Washington, D.C. on August 11 and August 12. But with last year's Unite the Right rally witnessing chaos and the death of a woman in Charlottesville, Virginia, some say the government should have turned down Kessler's request.
Clarence, where does the line between public safety and free speech fall, in your mind?
That's a brilliant question, and
Thank you.
It's one Americans are always dealing with. But the fact is that you must treat every group equally, even the hate groups, as far as free speech is concerned. And that's what we have here. What we got to watch out for is take precautions so another Charlottesville disaster doesn't happen. I'm sure that will occur. But this is something Richard Spencer and the other groups, alt-right groups, really are trying to get back into center stage again after Charlottesville, and this is one of the first big attacks.
It's a preliminary okay. The Park Service hasn't fully signed on it. They're now going to look at the security concerns.
Sure.
If they feel that they can protect them, and I think that was the problem in Charlottesville, they were unprepared. And secondly, if anybody shows up with a firearm, they should be arrested and prosecuted.
They can't do it. But Clarence is right. There's a Skokie decision in Illinois where the Nazis were allowed by the Supreme Court to march through Skokie, the Jewish community. And I think having done that, these people got a right to protest and march. But Charlottesville was a disaster because the police almost pushed these guys together. They didn't coordinate it. They were condemned in a report. But the D.C. police are going to handle this very well and keep them separate. And nobody brings in sticks with their placards, Tom.
No Buchanan pitchforks allowed.
And no tiki torches?
Free speech exists to protect objectionable speech. Unfortunately, we all probably certainly wish that this type of protest wouldn't occur. But the right to do it is certainly there. But exactly right, the issue is public safety. We don't want to see what we saw in Charlottesville, and I think the Washington, D.C. Police Department knows how to handle these situations.
Why do you think culturally there seems to be kind of commonality on the panel in terms of support for free speech? In Europe, you would not find that, at least on the part of your contemporaries on the left.
Different traditions, I mean, the First Amendment is quite a remarkable document in itself, and it grows out of American culture, and it has helped create American culture. And it's one thing people tend to agree on across the board.
And in Germany in particular, because of their particular history, there is a great fear that if you give these kind of groups an inch, that they'll somehow take over.
There are tremendous strains in our society which are really testing and stretching the limits of the First Amendment in terms of language, what people say, what they put on placards, what names they call each other. I mean, American democracy is being tested here. The First Amendment, of course, is right out on the cutting edge.
Yep. Do you think, Matt, that we are going to see this sort of, there is this fragment on the left that does want sort of moral restriction, and we see some evidence of that in campuses. I mean, do you think, though, there is a new unity now? No, I mean, because Eleanor and Clarence here have quite eloquently defended free speech.
That's true. And I mean, one of the really disappointing, I think, developments in America is that you have to have a free speech zone on a college campus. I mean, I would hope a college campus would be a free speech zone.
Sunshine is the best disinfectant.
But the left believes it has found truth, and having found the truth, they say about Nazis are horrible. Why should you let Nazis speak in March?
That's the thing. What I find really dangerous is there is an attitude that's popular on a lot of people on the left, but the right as well, that you can injure people with words, and thus you can step in as if this were a gun and thus control it. That's a dangerous attitude because this country, we have civil rights groups and everything else.
Speech can be very dangerous. I mean, you're talking about Germany. I mean,
For reputation.
Adolf Hitler would never have attained power without his speaking abilities.
But he had scapegoats and he called for action. Words can cause damage in like a gun or other weapons, and that can lead you on that pathway of trying to
That's how you get duels. That's how Hamilton got killed, with his words.
That's right.
Look at us
Aaron
coming full
Burr.
circle.
Maybe we should bring back duels, and maybe the Congress would shape up a little if they
Who
had
would you,
that
if
threat.
it was a Trump duel, who would you assign to fight
Oh,
Trump?
my.
Somebody from the NRA, right, Eleanor?
All right.
Democratic members don't want guns anyway.
All right. And we would only endorse that with little toy guns, so no one was actually hurt. Anyway, we'll be right back with predictions.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. With gridlock in Washington, states are stepping in to mandate paid sick and family leave policies, creating a compliance nightmare for companies with a nationwide workforce. The ERISA Industry Committee is fighting back. Learn how we can help your company at Eric.org.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Predictions, Pat.
Angela Merkel's Bavarian sister party will require her to take a tough line on the Bavarian border, or she will be gone.
Eleanor.
Good news for the resistance this week. Steve Schmidt, who is John McCain's campaign manager, highly respected political operative, has renounced the Republican Party, says he will join and help change over the Congress. Also, Michael Bloomberg, former Republican, former independent, is throwing his millions behind the resistance.
Matt.
The AMLO, the frontrunner for the Mexican presidency, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the leftist candidate who finished second both in 2006 and 2012, is the overwhelming frontrunner to be elected. I'm told that the current president will negotiate NAFTA in the 5-month period between when AMLO is elected on July 1st and December 1st when he takes office, so they can clear the decks.
Interesting. Clarence.
Look for the MC13 to be the Willie Horton of this midterm election here. You can see it in Trump's speeches.
MS-13.
I'm sorry, MS-13. And you can also, like in the Virginia race, where unfortunately for the Republican candidate it backfired and didn't work. But we'll see what happens this time.
Okay, in lieu of a prediction, I want to thank all of you for watching, for your support, even of those of you who sometimes criticize me. I appreciate the constructive criticism. I also want to take a moment to remember Charles Krauthammer, who sadly passed away this week. He was a great intellect and a great man. He always used to tease me about my stubble on Fox News. Anyway, and here's a random fact. 70 years ago today, the Soviet Union began its blockade of Berlin. Over the next 11 months, the Western Allies flew more than 200,000 supply flights to provide West Berlin residents with food. That operation saved many lives, and fearing Truman's response to any Soviet escalation, the Soviets backed down and ended their blockade in May 1949. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.